Welcome to Reason Workshop, Class 15 on the Kong. We'll start out browsing, loading, and saving patches. Then we'll go through the pad section, the hit types, linking, muting, and alternate. Then we'll go through the drum control panel, then the drum modules, the drum effects, and then Kong connections. Finally, a test. This is Kong with 16 pads that relates to the first 16 keys on your keyboard. There is not a step sequencer within it like a redrum or a matrix, so you pretty much play those in. On the right side, you have the master volume at the top. Now for browsing, loading, and saving patches. So all 16 pads are saved within a Kong patch that contains all 16 different drum modules. But then you also have the individual drum sounds, modules, and effects slots that are associated with it saved. Now, in browsing sounds, you can go into the Reason Factory sound bank, into the Kong patches. Here, Kong patches, and then you have Kong kits, which create the kits with all 16 pads, and then you have the individual sounds down here. And as you can see, some of those are WAV files, and then others are .drum files. So these are virtual synth drums, and it has those effects modules that are associated with it. And you can save any of those sounds as well. Let's go through the pad section now, through the hit types, linking, muting, alternate, mute, and solo. So here's this basic drum beat. As you can see, there's just three things: hi-hat, kick, and snare. Now you can mute those or solo them by these buttons. And you can go to that quick look assignment to assign mute. Now let's go into the group settings. So here I'm in mute. You can see that every time that the snare hits, the hi-hat is muted out. You can also select link. So now every time that this pad hits, which is pad 6 by the way, also pad 3 is attached to it. And I can assign others to that as well. All of these different snare drums. Now let's do the same thing with the kick drum. Okay, so we're gonna select E, and then for that hi-hat, we can select F, so that now the sound is a bit fuller. Instead of just layering, now let's use this as an alternate. I put the kick drums on A, and the snare drums all are on B, and then those hi-hats are all on C. Now let's go over drum assignments. Okay, so by default, all those pads are assigned to their own drum module. So drum module 1 is assigned to 1, 2 is assigned to 2, but let's change that so that multiple pads control one module. We'll go through that in more detail when we cover the modules. For now, let's go to the drum control panel. Okay, on the drum control panel, you have volume level, tone, pan, the auxiliary send 1 and 2, which relate to these jacks on the back. So it sends a percentage of the signal out of that output. And then you also have the bus effects, which relate here to that effect slot. And then you have the decay. And I can go back and a quick look. And as you can see, as I click on the different pads, the volume changed. And then you have the offset of the pitch and the decay of each individual drum. Now let's go over the kinds of modules. Let's start out with the NN Nano. So you could select 4 different samples, or obviously press sample. This is sample something that's plugged into the sampling input on the back. And since all of them are assigned to the same drum, we can go over to hit assignment. And again, I'll hit the quick look there. All 4 of those pads will relate to this same module. And within that nano, you can select different velocities, or you can also layer. So I can add a layer just by hitting add layer, and I could put that to a bass drum. So now you can hear both those sounds together when it hits. And you can select the velocity to move it quieter. And you can have them play in reverse. And also what's very important is the gate, which is kind of like a redrum, and I would suggest you to move that really, really, really low if you want a harder gate kind of cut off. Let's go over the nurse recs. So let's say we load in this flute sample. So there's a bunch of different hit types. Since those 4 pads are each hit type, you can see this is trigger and that's stop. Slice trigger plays a slice of that loop, and you can specify that down here, what slice that is going to be. And you can select multiple slices to alternate between each one. The next hit type is called chunk trigger. There's so much you can do with it. So we're going to put them all to chunk trigger. And as I do that, you can see that the nurse rex changes with this little symbol above it of which chunk that I want to assign to each pad. So if I just want those first 2 notes on that pad, and then maybe the next phrase on pad 2, and then this part on pad 3, and finally this section on pad 4. Alright, so now let's go through the physical models. Here's the bass drum, the acoustic bass drum, and you can adjust the pitch, tone, the decay, the shell level, the beater level. Let's go to the next one. This is a physical snare. You can select the pitch and adjust the tuning, adjust the decay. You can adjust the bottom pitch and the mix. Really great parameters. And tom. And it's interesting because you can go from a very small tom to a really massive low tom, almost usable as a kick drum. Next, let's go over the synth bass drum. You can control the bend amount, the bend attack and tone. You can almost turn it into a laser sound if you want. So there's some really good tones on that synth drum. Next is the hi-hat. You can turn the click up. The ring. Snare drum, which also has decay, pitch, mod frequency, mod decay, mod balance, noise, and noise tone. There's a bunch of parameters just to fine tune the sound that you're looking for. And then finally you have synth tom. Now let's go over the different effects modules. So you have noise, which just adds some extra grit. You also have tones, which adds a little bit of pitched material. After that you have the compressor and a filter, low, mid, high pass. And you have overdrive to add some extra distortion. There's several different kinds. Parametric EQ, a rattler, which actually adds like snare tension to the sound, a ring modulator, a drum reverb, tape echo, and then finally a transient shaper. And they can be plugged in a whole bunch of different places, either specific for each individual drum, or the last two slots are for bus effects and for the master effects. Now let's take a look at the back. So you have 16 outputs, which you can split out certain drums to go out of those outputs to their own mix channel. But then you also have gate ins and outs of every single drum pad. You also have auxiliary send outs. So if you wanted to send an external effect just out to that drum, then you can route that way. You also have additional sequencer control if you wanted to use a matrix. There's also modulation control, other CV control. Then down below that you have an input for basically a breakout jack. So if you wanted to run signal through just the effects of the Kong. And the next thing is for routing. This is something I commonly do. Take a drum and plug it into its own mix channel. In this case, I'll select this module and route it into 3 and 4. I'll just create a mix channel down here and draw a cable from 3 and 4, and then that drum now is coming out of its own mix channel, and you can put its own effects just on that drum, whereas all the rest of the drums are coming out of the Kong mix channel. Another wiring configuration, since you're already familiar with the redrum and its internal sequencer, is you can actually take the gate outputs of redrum channels. So in this case, I'm just going to draw the gate output of redrum channels 1 through 8 to the gate input of Kong pads 1 through 8. So now I can just start programming on the redrum itself, and you will see the Kong pads light up because they're getting triggered by what's sequenced down on the redrum.